As Sun Wukong and Yu-One advanced toward Athena and her lackeys, Athena gripped the Gorgon shield tightly, activating the Gorgon blessing of war. Green energy swirled around the shield, and the eyes carved into it flared with light. Wukong, closing in on her, gripped his staff with both hands and unleashed a powerful strike. Athena braced herself and blocked with the shield, the impact sending out shockwaves of green energy. Athena stood her ground, her eyes sharp as she analyzed the situation. If she faltered, the front line behind her would collapse, and Yu-One would break through. In a flash, as Wukong pressed his attack, Athena leapt from the ground, her body wrapped in the green aura. She landed gracefully on Wukong's staff, and without hesitation sprinted along it, charging toward him. Gorgon shield in one hand, a golden sword in the other. Wukong's eyes widened but quickly narrowed with excitement. A smirk spread across his face. "What are you trying to pull?" Without waiting for her response, Wukong commanded his Rui Jingyu to shrink. The staff started to shorten beneath Athena's feet, throwing her off balance. But Athena had anticipated this. Just as the staff shrank, she leapt into the air. Wukong grinned and thrust his staff toward her. "Grow," he yelled. In an instant, the staff extended, striking Athena midair. She lost her balance and plummeted toward the ground. Wukong didn't let up. With a snap of his fingers, the flying nimbus swooped in, and he vaulted onto it. With one hand gripping his staff and a mischievous grin plastered on his face, he shot toward the falling Athena. Meanwhile, Yu-One and Arthur were locked in a fierce battle against Athena's lackeys. Arthur wielded his great sword, Excalibur, skillfully fending off attacks aimed at Yu-One's back. Yu-One slashed through the enemies with his black sword, cutting down anyone in their path. Suddenly, a thunderous crash echoed through the battlefield. The ground trembled, debris and dust exploding into the air. Yu-One glanced back, catching a glimpse of Wukong clashing fiercely with Athena. His mind raced. Athena, so desperate over Ares' death? The stories were wrong. He refocused on the battle ahead, the mystery lingering in his thoughts. Yu-One's body began to heat up as he activated Cinder Eyes, but the fatigue from his earlier battle with Ares caused the flames to flicker and waver. Desperate to maintain control, he activated his sensory field to keep the enemies at bay, but the strain was overwhelming. His head pounded with pain. He had pushed himself too far. He clutched his head, closing his eyes as the pain intensified. Sensing weakness, the Olympus lackeys leaped at the opportunity, charging toward him. Arthur, ever watchful, sprang into action, cutting down the attackers before they could reach Yu-One. Blood sprayed across the battlefield, some of it splattering onto Yu-One. He opened his eyes, still gripping his sword, and glanced at Arthur with a mocking grin. "I could have dodged that. Why go all out to kill them?" Yu-One quipped, his tone sharp. Arthur, hearing Yu-One's words, turned to him and frowned. "If your goal is just to escape, then why are you fighting them like this? Just finish them off." Yu-One sighed, his hand still resting on his head, and responded with a hint of frustration. "I have my reasons. We need to escape, not slaughter them." Internally, Yu-One knew the truth. If too many tower rankers were killed now, their strength in the fight against the outer evil beings would weaken. These warriors, even as enemies, would one day be necessary to slay those greater threats. He had to keep them alive, despite the battle raging around him. Arthur, not fully understanding but trusting Yu-One's judgment, nodded. "Got it," he said before charging toward the Olympus rankers once more. At the temple entrance, the remaining Olympus rankers gathered, weapons drawn, ready to hold the line. One shouted, "Stop them! Don't let them through!" Yu-One smirked, his voice rising above the chaos. "Hey guys, ever heard of dual core?" One of the rankers, a green-haired warrior, snarled. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Shut up!" Beside him, a black-haired player hesitated, sensing something was off. In an instant, Yu-One activated his divine fire, mixing it with demonic energy. Black flames surged around him, swirling with divine power. He raised his sword, his gaze locked on the Olympus rankers. "I'm tired," Yu-One said, his voice dripping with exhaustion and irritation. "I really just want to leave. So, get out of my way." Yu-One's cinder eyes flared, their fiery glow intensifying as he brought the divine fire under control, aided by the heavenly demon spirit technique. The fire swirled around him in a controlled blaze. With a swift wave of his sword, he launched a devastating strike at the rankers guarding the temple entrance. The divine fire followed the slash, and as it made contact, An enormous explosion erupted, obliterating the gate and reducing everything in its path to ash. Screams of agony echoed through the temple as the fire consumed the rankers. Yu-1 didn't waste a second. He sprinted into action, darting through the wreckage and out of the temple. As he descended the stairs, he glanced back at the destruction. The divine fire had turned everything into rubble. He thought of it as a cheat skill, too powerful unless his opponent was a high ranker. Looking up, Yu-1 caught sight of Sun Wukong and Athena's fierce battle. Wukong was on the defensive, but Yu-1 wasn't worried. It wasn't ideal, but they had achieved what they needed. As he escaped, Yu-1 smirked, casting one last glance back at the burning temple. Olympus, you've made us your victims for too long. That changes now. This is the beginning of your destruction. Up above, Athena's eyes flared with rage as she realized Yu-1 had escaped. She hovered in the sky, her aura swords poised to strike at Sun Wukong. But suddenly, she stopped mid-attack. Wukong noticed her hesitation and raised an eyebrow. "What's wrong?" he asked, his Rui Jingyu staff resting on his shoulder. Athena's eyes narrowed. "Yu-1 got away. There's no reason to fight you anymore." Wukong followed her gaze to the temple below, now ablaze with divine fire. Realizing what had happened, he let out a low chuckle. "Not bad, Yu-1. Not bad." Before retreating, Athena turned to Wukong, her expression sharp. "Was this whole thing planned by you and Yu-1?" With a grin, Wukong shrugged. "Well, Yu-1 doesn't really like it when things don't go his way." Hearing Sun Wukong's arrogant words, Athena was momentarily stunned. What was with Wukong's attitude? She began to wonder if Yu-1 had predicted her arrival all along and set Wukong in motion. But what puzzled her even more was why Sun Wukong would follow Yu-1's plan. As Athena stood deep in thought, Sun Wukong noticed her confusion. With a mocking grin, he waved her off. "Don't think for a second you're getting anything out of me." His eyes blazed with excitement as he continued, "At least the fight was fun." Without waiting for a response, he summoned the flying Nimbus, and with a parting grin, he called back, "We'll meet again soon." Athena watched his retreating figure, still pondering Wukong's cryptic words. Why did he sound so certain that they'd meet again soon? After leaving the temple, Yu-1 descended 2 floors to the 38th floor, a land covered in dense forests and towering mountains, with volcanoes dotting the landscape. The world was mostly uninhabited, the few scattered towns surrounded by wilderness. As Yu-1 cut through the thick underbrush with his knife, he muttered, "How can anyone live in such a boring place?" The forest seemed endless, its untamed nature making it difficult to navigate. But Yu-1 wasn't lost. He had been here before. Relying on old memories, he followed a path that only he could recognize. His eyes glowed red as he crouched down to inspect faint tracks on the ground. "Found you," he murmured, rising to follow the trail. After walking for what felt like miles, the forest finally gave way to a vast wasteland, the sun beating down on the barren ground. Suddenly, the earth trembled, and the sound of falling trees echoed through the forest. In the distance, massive trees, several meters thick, tilted and crashed to the ground. Yu-1 headed toward the noise, and as he approached, he heard a familiar, deep, heavy voice amidst the chaos. "Are you lost?" It was the voice he remembered. Another tree fell. The method was unlike anything Yu-1 had seen. This man wasn't using an axe, but his fists shattering the trees with brute strength. Piles of fallen timber lay to one side as the man continued his task. Yu-1 walked up behind him, unfazed by the destruction. "What are you doing here? Are you a lumberjack now?" Yu-1 asked, raising an eyebrow. "Something like that for now," the man replied, shrugging as if it was the most natural thing. "So, your home must be nearby then?" Yu-1 pressed further. The man paused, a bit confused. "Why?" "I'm exhausted. Figured I'd take a few days off somewhere peaceful." Yu-1 replied, his tone casual but laced with the fatigue he was trying to downplay. The man looked at Yu-1 suspiciously. "If you're lost, I'll draw you a map. It's dangerous around here. You should get out while you can." Yu-1 chuckled lightly. "Dangerous? This place?" The man glanced around, completely unfazed. "Really?" Yu-1 expected the answer, but it was still a relief to hear it. Unlike Sun Wukong, who never thought things through, this guy was direct and reliable. "All right, how about this? Take me to your place. I'll pay for the stay," Yu-1 said, exaggerating his exhaustion just a bit. I'm so tired I feel like I'm about to pass out. The man studied Yuan for a long moment, then finally nodded. Follow me. He walked over to a massive pile of wood, trees stacked up like they weighed nothing. With one hand, the man effortlessly lifted the entire pile, easily several tons, and began walking. Yuan sighed as he followed, watching the man's back. That personality hasn't changed at all. Insist a little, and he'll help you out. Hercules, despite his outward strength and ferocity, had always been kind-hearted to a fault. He just couldn't say no. Still can't believe he's chopping firewood in the middle of nowhere, Yuan thought. Hercules, the high-ranker who could crush Olympus itself, was wasting his time here, doing lumberjack work. The same Hercules known as the Giant Hunter. The ground trembled under Hercules' footsteps as he hauled the wood. Each step left a noticeable impact. Yuan couldn't help but marvel at how easily he carried such a massive load. After a silent walk, they arrived at a large, rustic cabin carved from a giant tree. The place was massive, far too big for one person. But it looked exactly as Yuan remembered. Hercules gestured to the door. It's open. Head inside. Yuan hesitated for a moment, glancing back at the towering stack of wood. What are you doing with all that firewood anyway? Rankers rarely felt cold, and they didn't need to burn wood for heat. Most high-level players would have no use for something so primitive. Hercules, still calm and casual, replied, You and I don't need it, but some people still do. Not everyone is a player. It was clear the wood wasn't for him. Hercules, even with his overwhelming strength, hadn't lost touch with the simpler side of life, helping those who still needed it. Yuan glanced at the pile of wood and smirked. Looks like you're sending that somewhere. You're doing a good deed. Hercules didn't respond. He kept stacking the cut trees, his focus on the task. After a moment, he looked down at Yuan. I'll clean up and get you something to eat. Just wait a minute. Yuan shrugged and headed toward the stove. You're letting me crash here. I'll handle the food. Don't worry. Hercules blinked in surprise at Yuan's polite tone. Weren't you the one saying you were exhausted? Yuan grinned. Just trying to pull my weight. Stoking the fire as if it were his own home, Yuan worked quickly. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow around the hut. Soon enough, the scent of cooked food filled the air. Yuan ladled the meal into simple wooden bowls, and the bonfire outside crackled, its warmth radiating in the evening chill. Hercules, having finished his work, sat down near the fire. Yuan joined him, handing over a bowl. Hercules took a bite, eyes widening in surprise. You're good in the kitchen. Do you cook a lot? Yuan shrugged. Sometimes, when I have to. Hercules glanced at him. You didn't stop for a second while cooking. Anyone watching would have thought you lived here for months. Yuan smiled, his eyes briefly closing. I doubt it. There was a pause before Hercules asked, What's your name? Yuan exhaled, taking a spoonful of the soup. You're quick to ask. He swallowed before answering. Kim Yuan. Kim Yuan, Hercules repeated thoughtfully. Never heard of you. Are you a ranker? Still a player, Yuan replied casually. But I've made a bit of a name for myself outside. Hercules looked down at his bowl. It's been too long since I've been out there. I barely interact with rankers anymore. I guess I missed a lot. Yuan, stirring his food, glanced at Hercules. You should get out sometimes. It's not good to cut yourself off from the world. Hercules chuckled. You don't seem all that close to it either. Yuan chuckled back. Fair enough. The brief exchange left both men in comfortable silence. Hercules, who hadn't smiled in a long time, felt a strange sense of ease as he stirred the soup in his bowl. It's odd, Hercules murmured, looking at Yuan. Feels like we've met before. The conversation, it flows so easily, like catching up with an old friend. Yuan smiled. Maybe like-minded people just click. Hercules chuckled softly. You're not exactly the social type either. Neither are you. Yuan shot back with a smirk. As the meal continued, the two men shared bits of their past. The warmth of the fire and the quiet forest felt like the perfect setting. Finally, Hercules leaned back. By the way, the name's Hercules. Ever heard of me? Yuan raised an eyebrow, pretending to be shocked. Oh, that high ranker? Hercules laughed for the first time in what seemed like ages, shaking his head at Yu-One's exaggerated reaction. "You're something else." With a satisfied sigh, Hercules put down his bowl. "I enjoyed our talk, but I'm done for the day. Time to sleep." He stepped on the fire to put it out, gave a nod, and headed into the house. That night, for the first time in a long while, Yu-One drifted off to sleep without a care in the world. 3 days passed in a blur. Yu-One spent most of his time following Hercules, chopping down trees and hauling massive logs. Yu-One hoisted several trees over his shoulder, the combined weight pressing down on him. He gritted his teeth and muttered to himself, "How does Hercules do this without breaking a sweat?" Every day felt like a cycle. They felled trees during the day, and Yu-One would cook at night. The meals brought back memories of the old days, back when they'd sit together in quiet camaraderie. But now, the silence weighed heavier than ever. Yu-One found himself glancing at Hercules more often, wondering what drove him to gather wood so obsessively. Why all the wood? Yu-One would think to himself, watching Hercules work tirelessly without explanation. There was something off, but Hercules never spoke about it. He just kept piling up tree after tree, day after day.